A discussion taking a look at the incoming Trump administration and efforts to make government more efficient with John Hart. He's the CEO of Open the Books, joining us now. Thanks for giving us your time.
You bet. It's a pleasure to be on.
Before we go into the discussion, a little bit about Open the Books for those who aren't familiar with it. How do you describe it to other people?
Yeah, Open the Books is a transparency organization. We started about 13 years ago, and we came about in part through a law that I helped work on when I was in the Senate working for Senator Tom Coburn. And there was a bill that we passed in 2006 with Barack Obama, and Coburn and Obama met in 2004. And it's called the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. It put all federal spending online. And the hope that Coburn and Obama had is that would create an ecosystem of organizations that would take that data and make use of it and make sense of it. So Open the Books is an organization that did that. Adam Andrzejewski, that was the co-founder. He was a good friend of this program. He passed away unexpectedly.
Sorry to hear that.
And I appreciate that. And so I recently took over just 3 weeks ago. So I know the issue well. Again, I worked on the bill that helped create Open the Books, but we're a first principles organization. I think transparency is a building block of a free society. If you remember from science class, carbon is a building block of life. Transparency, when you connect it to things like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, it brings those principles to life. So what we're trying to do is really reinvigorate what we think of as a free society through transparency.
For the people watching, how easy is it to get information about what the government spends, what the government does, et cetera?
Well, that's great. Well, thankfully, it's become a lot easier because we forced the government to put all federal spending online. But our organization tries to put every dime online in real time at all levels of government. So it can be easy, but it can be very, very difficult. A lot of localities will play hide the ball with spending and send us forms and files that are impossible to search. So we have a very get the data team that makes sense of that information. And on the federal level, you know, when you start to go down the contractor, subcontractor level, it gets more and more difficult. So what we try to do is we're like the James Webb Space Telescope. We zoom in on an area of spending and bring all those things to light and help the American people understand what government's doing with their money.
We'll talk about some of those specifics in a little bit, but to this idea of spending or at least making government efficient, what do you think of the names that have emerged at the head of this, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, and what they've been tasked to do?
Well, frankly, I'm ecstatic that they're doing this. Coburn was on the Simpson-Bowles Debt Commission. That came about after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. There was a quest to find a grand bargain to deal with our long-term entitlement problems. And at that time, our debt to GDP ratio was about 90% or 100. Now it's 120%. We're spending more on interest on the national debt than we are on defense. So there's a real national security threat to the spending we have. And back 40 years ago, President Reagan put the Grace Commission together, found that 1 out of every 3 tax dollars wasn't being spent efficiently. And Congress has not done a good job of bringing that down. Coburn helped bring it down for a 2-year period with his colleagues in the Senate to 2012, 2013. That was the first real spending cut since the end of the Korean War. He got rid of earmarks. But a lot of that work has been undone. So we need to tackle that looming fiscal problem we have. And
what do you think about the specific approaches that they plan for, taking a look at the minutia, taking a look at the workforce size itself, and what ultimately ends up for the taxpayer as far as will services be impacted? Right. Will other things be impacted because of the shrinking of government, so to speak?
Well, I think, actually services I think will get better. One of the key findings that we were able to pull out of GAO, we forced GAO to do an annual report on duplication. And one of their key statements was if you downsize and streamline government in the right way, you improve the quality of services because you make it easier for government to even communicate with itself. So I'm very optimistic that we can have fairly dramatic downsizing of government and improve the quality of services. And I view this is not a demolition project, this is a restoration project. I think we're in a 1989 moment in the United States where that was the year the Berlin Wall came down. This could be the year the bureaucratic wall comes down that separates the people from the government. And we've been on a 100-year path of increasing spending since Woodrow Wilson, really. So this could be the end of an era and the move back to restoring our founder's vision of limited government.
You said this is not a demolition project, and I think a lot of people have the perspective that the approach that Mr. Musk and Mr. Ramaswamy might just do just that.
Well, I just disagree with that. I think what we've seen is Congress has really outsourced a lot of their decision making to what's called the administrative state. So Republicans tend to describe it as the deep state, and I think the deep state is real. There are people within the federal agencies that will obstruct and don't want to support the president's agenda, even though that's their job is to do that. But we also have what I call the default state. We've just been doing things a certain way for decades, and it's going to be very helpful to have people on the outside who have, Elon Musk is a historically significant figure. So to have him apply his expertise, I wish we would have had that when I was working in the Senate with Coburn. That would have been very helpful to have his outside counsel supporting the work we were doing. So I think it's going to be a very positive. Yeah, of course, there's going to be people that are upset, and that's why our organization is so important, because our job is to bring the spending to light and let the public have a free and open fight about what is in their interest.
The gentleman put out an op-ed this week about what they hope to do, and it reads in part like this: "We are assisting the Trump transition team to identify and hire a lean team of small government crusaders, including some of the sharpest technical and legal minds. The team will work with the new administration, with the White House Office of Management and Budget. The tool will advise us, DOGE as it's known, at every step to pursue three major kinds of reform: regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings. We will focus particularly on the driving change through executive action based on existing legislation rather than passing new laws." Those three approaches: regulatory, administrative, and cost savings.
Right.
You look a lot into that world. What are they facing as they hope to do that?
Yeah, I think if you look at the just the duplication of the federal government, there are different buckets you can find significant savings pretty quickly. One is duplication. That's about $100 billion. And then improper payments and fraud in Medicare, Medicaid, that's about $100 billion. And then there's a lot of just questionable, wasteful, silly spending. The bridges to nowhere, shrimp on a treadmill, cats, or drag shows in Ecuador. And you can get another significant block of savings in that category. So their focus right now, and again, I would caution everything we're seeing. They've been very forthright and public about what they want to do, but President Trump hasn't even taken office yet. And so I think DOGE is going to be a work in progress. We don't fully know the scope of what they're going to do, other than their charge is to come out with a report in 2026. But you also have to keep in mind that we already have a standing debt commission in this country. It's called the United States Congress. And Congress is going to get to have a say on what they want to do. So my feeling is Musk and Vivek are going to put pressure on Congress to act, and it's in Congress's interest to act now and not wait on their report. And that's what the founders intended, is that there would be a competition, the separation of powers, to have a discussion of what is the best optimal size and scope of government.
This is John Hart joining us. Open the Books. He serves as their CEO. And if you're going to ask him questions about this idea of efficiency and the work of their organization, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans. Independents, 202-748-8002. Federal workers, if you want to give your thoughts too, 202-748-8003 is how you do that. You can always text us at that same number, 202-748-8003. You talked a little bit about your work with Senator Coburn on this. From what your experience was, what challenges might these two face? I know it's a different kind of situation, but you probably have lessons learned from these efforts. What challenges do you think they face?
Well, I think every dollar in the federal government is protected by a special interest or a constituency. So they're going to every dollar of savings is going to be a fight for them. And I describe, serving in the arena is a little bit like swimming in the ocean. Like, you can study swimming in the ocean, you can read about it, but until you're there and do it, you don't quite understand the currents. And there's really two currents at work here. There's the surface level current, and then there's the undertow and the undercurrent. So there are two trends on the surface and below that are going to really help Elon and Vivek. One is that we've had a political realignment in this country. So the GOP is now the working class party. So one of the hurdles that we faced was the left would argue that anything we would do to reduce spending would be harmful to low-income Americans, to working-class people. So now the base for the working class is with the GOP. So the people advocating for those savings are now on that side. So that's going to be a very helpful dynamic. And then secondly, I think we've seen over the past, really in the digital age, that we're living through the biggest disruption and change in information technology since the printing press. So power is moving away from centralized institutions, whether it's the media, whether it's political parties, and this administrative state, this fourth branch of government. Power is going to be flowing away from that. So those are two big trends that I think bode well for the chances of DOGE to make significant savings.
We have some calls lined up for you. Let's hear from Iris. Iris is on our independent line in Michigan for John Hart of Open the Books. Iris, good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning, Pedro. Good morning, America. Sir, is there anything in the writings, in the laws of this country that allow one man to come to office and remake the way America works by establishing sanctuary cities for people who are coming here and just move all over the place? I cannot believe what I saw when I first saw that list of sanctuary cities. It was like the whole country was a sanctuary. Is that legal? Is that what they call constitutional? Could you please tell us? Thank you. I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I don't think this whole idea of sanctuary cities, I mean, one of the key priorities of the administration is going to be getting our immigration system under control, and you know, they're going to prioritize removing people who have illegal immigrants who have broken the law, and there's a big question of, well, how much deportation can they do effectively in a short period of time? So I think that's going to be the priority, and that's how they're going to go after these immigrants in sanctuary cities.
Republican line, Michael in Florida, Clearwater Beach. Hi.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Real quick, my call is about the unionization of government employees, which I guess makes it harder to get some of these people out of these jobs. But it also flies in the face of the taxpayer who's paying for these employees. Washington, D.C. voted about 90-some-odd% Democrat. It happens in a lot of big cities. So the unions and the government become in bed together. And the taxpayer is paying the bills. We vote, and they're more or less leaning in a fashion that helps the Democrats, and it's kind of a payoff. It's a pay-for-play scheme. I'd like to see these unions eliminated. What's your opinion on how that affects this particular problem we're looking at with the budget?
Well, yeah, there's going to be a very significant debate on something called Schedule F, which is a new classification of federal employees that the Trump administration wants to put in. That, and the designation is any bureaucrat that has a policymaking role should be subject to firing from the administration. So if they go through with that, they could eliminate a significant part of the workforce. And we've done deep dives on all the agencies. So if you think about EPA, for example, there are 14,000 staff at the EPA, and we found that since 2018, we've spent $100 million on 223 public affairs officers. And why is that? I mean, that seems like a large number. But in Coburn's office, we had 2 PR staffers, me and one other assistant. And so I think the caller is getting at is that there are these protections to keep these people in place that are probably inappropriate, and the administration is absolutely going to go after that.
You used the word bureaucrat. Does everybody fall under that category when it comes to a federal employee working day in and day out for the government?
Well, no, I think that's a great question. What's happened with the administrative state is Congress has not wanted to take responsibility for decision-making authority, and so when they outsource that, it's a bit of a heads I win, tails you lose game, where if the quote bureaucrats make a decision they like, the members of Congress takes credit for it. If they make a decision they don't like, they blame the bureaucrats. So what Trump is trying to do is, this is not an executive power grab. I think the biggest problem in Washington is not executive overreach, it's legislative underreach. And by downsizing the administrative state, the president is actually moving power out of the executive branch and putting the onus back on Congress to own these decisions and own this responsibility. And one of the cases that Vivek and Elon have highlighted is EPA versus West Virginia. So back when that was decided, some members of Congress blasted the Supreme Court on the Democratic side and said that this is a death sentence for the planet because it took away power from the EPA to regulate power plants. And never before has one branch of government been more mad at another for giving their power back. So the founders want this jealousy and this rivalry between the branches, and that's what I think this DOGE project is going to help restore.
I guess it's a scenario, but do you see, in instance, is this going to be more of a workforce reduction in order to save, or do you see elimination of whole departments? And do you think that's a good idea?
I think it's going to be both. I think the sequencing that I think they have laid out is they're going to start with executive orders. And so the purpose of this op-ed that they wrote is to lay the groundwork for those executive orders.
And they're just saying they have legal action to do.
To say they have legal action, and they can take fairly dramatic steps, I think, to do that, and that would be upheld. And then Congress is going to look at that and think, okay, well, if we're going to pass appropriations bills, maybe we shouldn't provide the same level of funding if we're not going to have the same size of workforce. So there's going to be a back and forth debate. And then hopefully in 18 months, they'll come out with a reorganization plan of some kind. And that will have to go through Congress to restructure federal agencies.
And I will ask you about what you think Congress is going to do with that once they get it. But let's hear from Eva. Eva in Mississippi, calling online for Democrats, also a federal worker. Eva, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
I want to know why they downsizing the federal jobs, because you got a lot of veterans. That's what they do when they get out the military. And they're talking about insurance and everything for us. So we had insurance, now we have a union. They broke that. It's nothing but privatizing jobs and giving it to someone else and taking all the rights away from the federal workers. And I heard him say on there, we are elite. It's not elite. It's getting paid. We pay him to go out and play golf every day. He brought his whole family in, but he paid his family. But we want to downsize. How can you downsize the government when you're getting more people in the United States? You can't downsize anything.
And Eva, if I may ask, what do you do for the federal government?
I work for Veteran Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Eva, thanks for giving your perspective.
Well, I think she mentioned Veterans Affairs, but the biggest agency is Department of Defense. And the DOD has not been able to pass an audit for 7 years. So there is need to downsize everywhere. But they're going to do this in a very thoughtful, compassionate way. Their goal is to not just drive people out of their jobs. Their goal is to help transition people into different kinds of employment. But history is full of technology changing how economies work. And we're in the AI era now. So back the Industrial Revolution gave people more muscle power. The AI revolution is going to give us more mental power. So what that means is we're going to have to downsize and redirect and reorganize. A lot of the jobs that used to be done by people are going to be done both by people and AI. And that's not going to destroy the total number of jobs. It's going to create a whole new sector of jobs that I think will give that caller more opportunity and more people like her more opportunities than we have today.
You said the Pentagon, there was just a story out earlier saying the seventh audit in a row, the Pentagon says that it's failed, but saying progress is made. What has Open the Books done when looking at the Pentagon?
Yeah, we've spent years looking at the Pentagon. One of the things that is interesting about defense spending is we call the DOD the Department of Everything. So the Pentagon doesn't just do defense; it does a lot of other things. Education. They've invested in DEI within the Pentagon that has nothing to do with warfighting capabilities. And even apart from the Pentagon, we found that there are more federal agencies with law enforcement and weapons authority than there are U.S. Marines. So we've given federal agencies the authority to carry firearms, and we've spent $35 million at the IRS, for example, on military-style equipment since 2006. So there's a lot of waste in the Pentagon. There's a lot of waste in other agencies.
This is John Hart joining us, by the way, with the organization Open the Books. He serves as their CEO. Let's go next to Peter. Peter in New York, Democrats line. Good morning. You're next up.
Yeah, Mr. Hart, thank you for your the work that you do. There was a very good article in the Wall Street Journal dated September 12, 2024, and it's titled, "Welfare is What's Eating the Budget." Means-tested programs, not Medicare and Social Security, are behind today's massive debt. There's well over 100 welfare programs in the federal government and local government that cost $1.6 trillion in 2023. And they keep talking about Social Security and Medicare, but in 2023, Social Security from a fund paid out 88.9% of the benefits. So these are benefits that we were taxed, and that money was put aside. It's not just coming out of the I understand it's coming out of the general funds, but this is funds that were already appropriated for this, and 49% 0.7% of Medicare was already funded by the American people.
Caller, if I may, what's the question for our guest, if I may?
The question is that I keep hearing from commentators, and also one other thing before you cut me off, that it's Social Security and Medicare that are really the big problem. It's not. It's this other funding. But I never hear anybody talking about a balanced budget amendment that needs to be passed and only extra spending to be done when it's absolutely necessary, that we need to have a balanced budget.
Okay, thank you. And I want to follow up quickly because the American Prospect, talking about this DOGE effort, said this in their recent piece on their online, saying the only possible way to achieve must cost-cutting goals would be to take a wrecking ball to entitlement programs, particularly Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, saying that the budget for federal discretionary spending, which is determined annually, is $1.6 trillion, which the caller mentioned, about 26% of spending. And they say even if that figure were zeroed out, fully abolishing, for instance, the FDA, the EPA, the USDA, and NASA, and their others, Musk will be well short of his goal. So to start, is it if they take a look at everything but entitlements, will they do the job?
It's going to be very difficult to get to $2 trillion without rethinking how do we protect. I would describe it. How do we protect the safety net? And the challenge with Social Security and Medicare is that we're promising people $2 in benefits for $1 of taxes, and I'm not in favor of raising taxes. So you have to think: is there a way to restructure these programs to protect them for particularly lower and middle income Americans? And that's the debate that the Simpson-Bowles Commission had. And there was a senator who made a statement that the only way to save Medicare as we know it is to change Medicare as we know it. And that wasn't a Republican; it was Joe Lieberman, who was Al Gore's running mate. So there is an understanding that if we really want to protect these programs for future generations, and particularly low-income Americans, they are going to have to think about, should we have something like means testing, where some of the benefit is redirected and you really protect the people that need the program the most. And the debate on entitlements always comes down to, is it going to be a universal entitlement or is it going to be a welfare program? And I think the future is going to be a hybrid of both of those. And the argument in favor of entitlements is that a program for poor people is a, quote, poor program. I don't think that's true. I think you can shift and have means testing, and there are higher income Americans who understand that there is an interest in society to not have people destitute. And that's good. I think the DOGE Commission is going to bring those issues to the surface, whether they want it to or not. And I think the president has said he's not going to, quote, go after Medicare and Social Security. But the truth is if we don't look at how to make them sustainable, we're going to have massive benefit cuts in the future.
These have always been known as third rail things,
That's right.
Do you think there's their mentality changing when it comes to the sanctity or these kind of things and willing to take on these issues?
I think there is a potential for a change. And the reason is, back to the point I made earlier, is that these two trends and dynamics is that the GOP is now the party of the working class. So when you have the trust and support of the base and working class Americans, you can speak to them in a way with credibility that you couldn't if it was the shoe was on the other foot, which was the case during the Simpson-Bowles era and during the Grace Commission. So I do think there's a new political dynamic, and it remains to be seen whether they're going to take advantage of that and come up with creative ways at attacking these vexing problems. Because the caller is right, is that when you pay into a system, you have the right to expect that money back. Mm-hmm. But we need to tell future generations the truth that we live in a world of finite resources, and we're putting our national security at risk and the security of lower and middle income Americans by not having a way to fund these programs without raising taxes massively.
Let's hear from Melvin. Melvin joins us from Florida, Democrats line. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. There you go. I was sitting here listening. First of all, the first thing he brought up was Ronald Reagan, what he did when following basically his budget policy. I guess he must have forgot that Ronald Reagan tripled the debt and the deficit when he got in office and left the country in a recession. Then we come along with trying to work with Trump. In his last administration, he spent twice as much as any other president in one term, $8 trillion. So I really don't understand what he's talking about with respect to how he's going to follow these particular individuals and trying to monitor the budget and see what they're spending or cut down on the money that the federal government is spending. And a lot of people will find out when you start cutting them federal people, it's a lot. Things are going to get a lot different and a lot harder for them to get the services that they really need. Thank you.
That's Melvin there in Florida.
Well, I'd say both parties are guilty of overspending. I mean, there's the tax and spend party, and then there's a tax cut and spend party. And Democrats and Republicans are both guilty of driving up the deficit for sure. I think in Reagan's defense, he did drive inflation way down during his term. And but it's true that Democrats and Republicans have together increased spending. And, you know, we passed the bipartisan transparency law with Barack Obama. But again, when I look at this as a 100-year trend, this is an opportunity to reverse something that is bankrupting the country. And it's going to produce incredible amounts of economic growth. That's one. So we tend to focus on these buckets as these fixed items, but the federal pie is not fixed. The federal pie can grow based on pro-growth economic policy. So if you have deregulation, if you shift more funds to the private sector, you know, Coburn believed that every dollar saved in Washington was a dream realized somewhere in America, and that politicians want to grow federal agencies, but we're trying to grow your agency and your ability to pursue happiness on your terms with your own resources. If that's the mentality that prevails, we're going to have economic growth that is going to far exceed any of the cost of cuts to serve. Or
the caller brings that up. It's a cause and effect, at least in his perception.
Sure.
If you cut things, ultimately things will be affected on the services. And how hard is it to change that perception?
Well, I think people change perception based on lived reality. And you know, Democrats were so upset after the election because they said the economy is doing well. Yeah, there's inflation, but it's global. But people didn't feel like they were doing well. And if you look at the trends over the past 40, 50 years, the size of government has gone up about quadrupled in terms of per capita spending. And by quite a few measures, real purchasing power has either increased a little bit or flatlined. So people feel like they're not able to afford basic things of life, you know, groceries, gas, and then when they see federal agencies quadrupling in size, they scratch their heads and think, well, why are we doing it this way? Why do we have 14,000 employees at EPA and 223 public affairs officers? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute with them.
Nelson. Nelson is in Florida as well. Republican line. You're on with our guest, John Hart. Go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're coming in fine. Go ahead.
Mr. Hart, as you know, the reason why lawfare was launched against Donald Trump was because he shook the apple tree of the status quo, and some of the apples actually fell. Thus, they panicked, and they've been trying to destroy him ever since. I believe that that's going to continue. The fact that they are attacking numerous of his picks for the cabinet is indicative of that. With that in mind, do you believe that the Trump administration will actually be successful in making some of these changes and eliminating such departments like the Department of Education, which has done a wonderful job of destroying our educational system, along with the teachers' union? And I'd be curious to hear what you think as to the possibility that the national debt will actually begin to be controlled, and this deficits that we are generating for future generations will begin to subsist and perhaps even not just slow down, but even be reversed.
Thank you, caller. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm optimistic because this is a unique period of time in history when it's not since Grover Cleveland has a president lost or won, then lost, and come back into office. And typically, the most significant accomplishments happen in the first year of an administration, even if you have 8 years in office. So this is Trump's first term in a way. And if he makes this his top priority, this can be his defining legacy, and it can be something that historians will remember for decades. If he changes focus, it's going to be very difficult to do a lot. And Congress is, again, going to have a lot to say about this as well. But right now, he needs to build on this momentum, in my opinion, and to move as quickly as possible. And Congress, it's in their interest as well to move quickly and to not wait until 2026. But again, assert their authority as the Standing Deficit Commission and take action now in this year that is going to support and the findings that Musk and Vivek officially report on in 2026.
Republican Congress, Republican House, Republican Senate, to what degree do you think there'll be a unified acceptance of what these recommendations will be? I know it's hard to tell, but it's the willingness, at least, to make these changes.
Yeah, I think what they'll end up doing is something called budget reconciliation, which, not to get too far in the weeds on process, but it enables Congress, when you're dealing with the size and scope of overall spending, and that allows them to pass things on a 51 vote threshold in the Senate. So Elon and Vivek are going to discover that the Senate includes 100 CEOs. So they're outside CEO experts, which is wonderful. But every senator is going to have their own perspective. And typically it takes 60 votes to get anything done in the Senate, but you can do a lot with 51 votes. And the House has a very narrow margin. But again, this is the reason to move very, very quickly. And to focus on things that are pro-growth, because the mandate really is to increase affordability, lower inflation, and a lot of the deregulation work can do that very quickly. Making energy more abundant is going to lower the price of everything, because typically the party in charge doesn't do well in the midterm elections. There's only been one election, I think, in the past 40 years, which was Bush in 2002, where the party in control gained seats in the midterm. Typically, they lose seats. Typically, there's an overreach, and the public corrects and punishes the party in charge. So they should not assume that they're going to have 4 years to do this. They should assume they only have 2 years to do this.
There was an announcement this week that Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to head a subcommittee on working on DOGE specifically. What do you think about that move?
I think there are I hope every member of Congress puts out their $2 trillion plan. In all seriousness, I think if every member, again, is a part of this commission, and it's an interesting point because, people tend to look at Washington and think there's this really carefully orchestrated plan behind the scenes. But the truth is Washington is not House of Cards. It tends to be House of Chaos. And people in high positions face a challenge. They look around and ask, well, what should we do about this? There's not a master plan. So if Marjorie Taylor Greene has a great plan, go for it. If another member has a great plan, we should let all those great plans compete, and the American people will decide what's the best.
This is from the New York Times. If you want to talk about her ascension to head this subcommittee, taking a look at DOGE matters, let's hear it from Tom. Tom in Pennsylvania, Democrats line for our guest. Hello.
Hi, good morning. Really love your show and your guests. My question is, with Pennsylvania, of all the federal tax dollars that are generated by the citizens, how much of those actually come back to the state? My one concern is if they're going to try to push all the agencies out at a state level, won't a smaller state that has a smaller tax base get shortchanged, and a larger state like Pennsylvania, New York, California get more of their money back?
Well, there is an idea to shift some of the agencies back to regions, and I think that's probably a good thing to do. And I think it's going to put people more in touch with their government to do it that way. But it remains to be seen whether they're going to be effective in doing that.
One of the criticism, or one of the highlights that both Elon and Mr. Ramaswamy make is this idea of working from home. Do you think it is as serious as they lay out? As far as people showing up at their claims that once a week or once a month or whatever?
Yeah, well, it's a serious problem because we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on federal agencies all over D.C. that are vacant. So you can't have it both ways. If you're going to allow work from home, you need to close down federal agencies and not put taxpayers on the hook to both subsidize people working from home while at the same time paying for their office space. So that Joni Ernst has done a lot of great work on that. So we're going to be following that very closely as well.
I'm pulling up your website. This is just one of the highlights there when it comes to this was for the Environmental Protection Agency. How often do these type of reports come out, and what do people get when they click on the links there?
Yeah, we do these reports sometimes once a week. We have a report coming out on misinformation where the federal government is actually spending money combating misinformation, $275 million, which raises the question, why is the government playing referee in the public square? We just did a report on Fauci had $15 million of special security protection. Why are we spending $15 million on Fauci? So we do these reports very consistently, and sometimes we'll do a deep dive on an agency every month or two, but we do smaller reports very consistently, sometimes once a week.
This is from Linda. Linda is in Utah, independent line. Go ahead. You're on with our guest.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call, and good morning. I was interested. I looked at your site a little bit, just learned about it today, and I want to know, how much the major contractors, Northrop Grumman, L3, were receiving in government contracts, and how much is the U.S. government paying for the medical research that, again, is turned over to the pharmaceuticals, and basically they get to charge whatever amount they want when we pay for the research, and how much the government's paying on the national security, the bombs, and the airplanes, and I couldn't seem to find it. It's not broken down by contractors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be difficult. That's a great question. We'll look into that. We've looked into that some, but there is a bit of a scandal on royalty payments where there's a big kickback that NIH and other agencies are getting through big pharma, and we've done reports on that you can find on our website.
From Rich. Rich is in Ohio. Rich joins us on our Republican line. Hi, Rich.
Yeah, wow. We've got some real good competition going, trying to save our big debt that we don't pass on to another generation. It seems like there's some common sense things we could do really quick. One is on energy, that if we free up our energy, we then don't have Iran get money, Russia get money, and send terrorists into all these other countries. Israel's paying, but a lot of other when these bad countries get a lot of money, gets to be a real problem. Another one could be done really quick is just close the door on immigration. Suddenly we won't have the problem. We'll save money. And by the way, we won't have people come in from North Korea, China, Russia, plus a whole lot of other people. In one time in our country, in order to come into our country, you had to be for our country, not figuring ways to blow up our buildings. I'll hang up and listen to your answers. Bye.
Yeah, that's Rich in Ohio.
Well, I want to talk about energy because we haven't spent a lot of time on that. There are two axioms that I approach this question with. One is that the best way to make something expensive is for government to make it affordable. And then the best way to make something unsafe is for government to make it safe. So with energy, what the Trump administration, I think, wants to do, and Chris Wright is a phenomenal pick for energy secretary. He's going to argue that free economies are clean economies. If we have more energy abundance, more energy dominance, that's going to help produce good economic and environmental outcomes for the public. And when you think about the size of the administrative state, a good example is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. One of the great errors we've made in judgment in our history in the past 50 years is not building nuclear plants 50 years ago. And had we done that, we would have had lower energy prices. We would be exporting energy and fossil fuels. And one of the reasons Russia invaded Ukraine is that Europe decided to not produce their own energy, but to buy it from Russia. So that was one of the factors that led Putin to invade Ukraine. So the caller's absolutely right that there's a major global national security dynamic at play here. And energy abundance will lower the price of everything.
As far as cutting things, though, would you cut out climate research and things associated to that?
No. Here's what I would cut is the regulatory footprint. So between I think 2000 and 2020, there were 460 deaths associated with coal plants that would not have otherwise happened. And then that's actually 1,000 times more people than died from Chernobyl. So we've had the kind of progressive left saying nuclear energy is not safe. Yet had we built nuclear plants 50 years ago, how many lives would have been saved? And so the point is that when agencies say that one technology is not safe, it increases the cost and increases human suffering in ways that are hard to calculate. So that's what I think we need to do is just make all of the above energy more abundant and more affordable.
One more call, and this will be from Whitney in Washington State. Democrats line.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I guess my question is about if we are removing a lot of federal employees from many different agencies, a lot that do data collection, data management, data analysis that is used by congressional members to help them inform and pass laws. Does that all get outsourced into the private sector as, and then it seems like then there is a more, like, is that just going to lobbyists? Is that just going to corporations who have the money to pay for those studies? It seems like it becomes a very ambiguous and could be greedy style of government where there's no public input and there's no public openness about how these things are designed and how data is managed.
Whitney in Washington State, thank you.
Well, I'd make a couple comments on that. One, at Open the Books, we've built the largest database of government spending in human history. We call it the Spending Genome Project, and we want to make that database more robust. So to the caller's point is we absolutely want to have access to clear data, and we're going to fight for that. And she raises an important point, is that when you think about cutting government, across the board cuts are the worst way to do it. It's sort of like if you've ever gardened, you don't mow the flower bed, you pull the weeds. You have to get on your hands and knees and look down at the ground and figure out, okay, this is a weed, this is good growth, and make smart, informed decisions. And I think Elon and Vivek are going to do that. They're business guys. They understand that you can't just clear cut. It doesn't mean they're not going to be dramatic with what they do. There's this idea that you can't use a scalpel, or Brad, you can't use a machete, you have to use a scalpel. Well, the scalpel can have an awfully long blade. And I think that's how they're going to approach this. But to the caller's point is, you don't want to eliminate key functions, and one of those is data. Is that the American public has the right to know how the government is spending their money, and we're going to make sure that continues.
OpenTheBooks.com is the website for our guest organization. He serves as the CEO. John Hart, his first visit to our studio. Hope you come back.
I bet. Would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.